Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another teaching moment from the Canadian Immigration Institute. I'm here with Cédric, Marin, and we are going to talk all about reconsiderations. What do you do when your visa is rejected? So, Cédric, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you?
Fantastic, fantastic. So, I'll let you guys in on a little secret. Mr. Cédric here drafted a phenomenal blog post that I want to share from our firm website that really is the foundation for what we're talking about today. But this video is going to breathe a whole bunch more life into this phenomenal little post. So head on over to Holthe Immigration Law, click on resources, and then when you click on resources, you can go to the blog, and this is where you will find this one. My visa application was refused. How can I prepare a request for reconsideration? All right, Cédric. So let's kind of give them a little bit of a high level about what we're going to cover today, which is essentially this. So right off the bat, what is reconsideration? Then we're going to jump into whether or not you should even file a reconsideration or just resubmit a new application, how to prepare it when you've made the decision to go forward, some examples, because that always is helpful, Cédric, when people can see what's actually been successful in the past, and then essentially how we can help you in the future if you run into this situation. And the reality is, and I'm sure all the lawyers at our firm, Cédric, can confirm this, we get more requests for this type of a thing than anything else. Because what happens when things go south, when there are problems? Who do they call, Cédric? Who do they call?
Yeah, we see a lot of requests with individuals coming to us for refused study permits, work permits, you name it. So we try to help them as much as we can.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, let's jump to number one, which is what is reconsideration? So what is it?
Well, a reconsideration request is at the very core, it's going to be a request that you're going to make to IRCC to reconsider your application. So it applies to various applications, a study permit, a work permit, visitor visa. And the idea is to write to the visa officer and say, look, you made a mistake somewhere. I am eligible. I do have the funds required. There's a mistake somewhere in my application, and I want you to look at why you should grant my visa, my application.
Gotcha. So how easy is that realistically today? You know, when you think about reconsiderations, and obviously this is the whole nature of this video, like how easy is that? How easy is it for an officer to even get the request in this current gong show that we call the whole Portalandia?
Yeah, so the request, to make the request itself, you can submit it by web form. So it's pretty straightforward to make the request. However, what you put inside the request, what you're asking the visa officer to reconsider, what documents, if any, you provide, whether or not the visa officer is going to have access to the web form in a timely manner, these are all important considerations in making the reconsideration request. So at the very start, it may seem very easy to make the reconsideration request, but making a good reconsideration request can be a little bit more complicated.
And that's a great segue into our next topic, which is in some cases, you know, we've seen like over the last, 16, however many years of practice I've had, there's been a lot of cases where the person is just done. They've done something wrong and it's the refusal is actually correct. And the only option that's feasible is not to request a reconsideration, which essentially confirms the error, but instead refile. So aside from that, you know, what are your thoughts on whether, you know, what are the things that you look at when you're deciding whether or not to proceed with reconsideration or a new application?
Right. So when you have a rejected visa or rejected application, you're going to want to look, for example, is there an error in the facts? Is there an error in the law? Was this a proper decision? So, for example, we've seen cases where someone, the rejection letter says you have family in Canada, right? You do not have a temporary intent in Canada. You might overstay your visa, right? But in these cases, it could not even be true that they have a family members in Canada. So if there's a clear error in the application, I would definitely suggest to make a reconsideration request. However, in some cases, it's better to make a new application. You can provide a new evidence, right? New forms, a letter of explanation, trying to have a good detailed study plan with more evidence to demonstrate how you're going to return at the end of your stay. So it's if it's a good decision and it was made with the proper law and facts, it might be best to have a stronger application with more information, with new documents to support your application.
Yeah. And, it's interesting too, when I think about the decisions that we made in the firm as to, proceeding with reconsideration or just refiling, at its very, very core is, how strong that original application was. And, there are even some gray areas where we're like, we could maybe consider reconsideration, but there is some grounds that the officer was correct in making their decision. And the beauty of a new one is that you can specifically address all of those areas of concern that the other officer had when they refused. You can actually address them and resubmit it fresh to a new officer. So there are clear advantages to it and disadvantages, and sometimes it's not so easy because it really turns on the facts. And when we have a world of Chinook or the advanced analytics that IRCC is rapidly rolling out, there are clear indicators of error that can creep in there. I just had a consultation with someone yesterday, and this is one of those kind of examples that I guess probably makes sense to set the stage for even why we're doing this. The person came to me wanting a reconsideration because IRCC did not follow the even basic laws of procedural fairness when they refused. Essentially, they told the person to update their file with certain information and to upload it into their portal. But they never opened up any slots in the portal for them to upload it into. And they gave them 30 days to respond. And so they submitted a web form requesting that they correct that, clear, error, and to open up a spot for them to upload. But there was no response because we're in crazy, no response world for IRCC right now. And so they sent multiple requests. And then eventually they sent all of the information via web form because there was no place to upload it before the 30 days passed. And on the day after the 30th day, they sent a refusal for not responding. So clear evidence to suggest that this is something that would be ripe for reconsideration, and failing that, I can't see any world where it wouldn't be successful in a judicial review context. But here's the kicker, and this is why it's so important for us lawyers to jump in and be able to dig deeper. They were asking for documentation, and I could see it, that the person actually couldn't provide. And there was even a danger of misrepresentation because the person was alleging that they had a sibling in Canada, and the person actually, the brother, was not in Canada at the time in which the application, the APRA, was actually submitted. They were in the US. They were planning on coming back, but they weren't there. So in this case, and in many cases, reconsideration may be possible, but what happens with the reconsideration request, Cédric, in the context of this? The officer has the ability to consider it or to reject it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So in the context of reconsideration, there's no concrete rules or procedures. So it's very, very relaxed in that sense. And they have a high level of discretion in terms of whether or not they're going to reopen your file and then make a new decision on your file. And the immigration manuals are very specific to not advise clients when their reconsideration request is being reexamined, more for procedural issues. But all to say is that it's a very relaxed process. and you may essentially never know if your reconsideration request has been examined in detail. But just to add to what you were saying, Mark, just very briefly, when you receive a rejected application, visa file, work permit, whatnot, there's other avenues as well. So, for example, you did mention on the judicial reviews, and this is really the last resort to go to court, to make an application for judicial review, to argue the facts and say, no, look, in front of a judge as to why your application should be granted. There's also, you can have other appeals as well through the Immigration Appeal Division. So there are other options. Today we're just focusing on the reconsiderations, but there's going to be many different blogs that we're actually developing right now that are looking at all the different aspects for refusals. And what we do with our clients, Mark, and as you know, we really look at why the application was rejected and how can we overcome it. So if we're going to submit a new application, we're going to work really hard to have all the points and argue in favor of our clients to make sure that everything is really strong with supporting documents. If we go through reconsideration, the same thing, right? We're going to show clearly that there's no family in Canada. This rejection letter on family in Canada does not make any sense, and we're going to try to argue it. But with the application process, a new application process, our clients will have procedural fairness. The officer must evaluate this application, obviously within a period of time and delays and whatnot, but the officer has to seriously look at this request. And if you're making a new application and then that gets rejected again, well, we're going to have a very good base to seek judicial review. We're going to have all the information, all the facts was in front of the decision maker, and it could make a great file for judicial review in some cases.
Yes. So essentially, we as immigration lawyers have a few tools in our toolbox, right? And depending upon which tool we use and which one we pull out really is determinative by the facts of your situation, your file, and your circumstances and the nature of the refusal. So there's a whole host of different things at play. But one thing is clear, Cédric, the quality of reconsideration request has a direct impact on the likelihood of success of that request. So not all requests are created equal, and just simply sending a web form request online that says, please reconsider your refusal, and then that's it, probably is going to have less of a chance of being successful than one that we put together where we filled in all the gaps, addressed any of the alleged concerns in the original refusal, and then supported it with the essential supporting documents. So let's jump into the third area, which is how to prepare a successful request.
Absolutely. So this is really a step-by-step. So the first step is you're going to want to get all the documents that you submitted as part of your application, right? So, you might have submitted your application a few months ago and not exactly remember what you submitted, but really have all those forms ready, all the supporting documents, all your letters, and look at the same documents that the visa officer was looking at when they rendered their decision, right? And there we go, the very first step. The second step you want to take is whether or not to request your visa notes, the GCMS notes, the notes of the officer, the GCMS notes, through an access to information request, through an ATIP request. So in this case, you're going to send a notice. However, if you're not a Canadian citizen, you're not physically present in Canada, you cannot send an ATIP request. They're not going to let you. So definitely something that we can do on your behalf. But in short, the ATIP request is going to give you essentially all the information that the government has for your visa application. And it might some cases has more information. It says rejected because family members in Canada, because of this, because of that. In some cases, there's nothing. There's nothing more than the letter that was provided to you. Right now, there's very big delays with the ATIPs. So we're kind of saying, do your reconsideration request on the information you have. At the same time, ask for an ATIP. When the information comes in, if there's anything new, you can consider to making a second reconsideration request. Because a lot of times, you have your school years coming up, you want to get studying, you don't have time to wait 90 days to resubmit an application, but we could definitely talk more in detail about when to make the reconsideration, the ATIP. You can do both at the same time and redo it. It's really up to you on your personal situation.
And Cédric, I think it was last year, myself and my fellow table officers with the CBA, we had a meeting with immigration and we talked about those refusal letters. And they wanted our opinions and our thoughts on the nature of the letters, everything from the details, what were contained in it. And so we provided some fairly substantial feedback to them on the challenges that exist when they don't give proper reasons in a refusal letter. And so, like you had alluded to, often if you do have the time and ability to request the notes, the actual GCMS notes, then sometimes little nuggets are revealed in that process that weren't in the letter, that then helps you to really address what the actual concerns of the officer are. So something to consider for sure. All right. So now I think we're on to the third step.
The third step is definitely an important one: how to draft, how to prepare, how to write your reconsideration request. Right. So it can take, as you mentioned, Mark, if you just say, please reconsider. I should get my study permit. I applied months ago. I'm waiting. You're not going to go anywhere, right? So we have here a few tips and a few things you should focus on. So the first thing you should do is, why are you contacting IRCC, right? Well, I'm making a reconsideration, but more importantly, what do you want, right? I want my reconsideration. I want my work permit to be approved. This is why I'm writing to you, right? And you're going to follow this with why should it be approved. So here we have factual errors and we have legal errors. So factual errors, right? You could think, for example, they say you've been rejected because you have family, you have significant ties to Canada, right? Meanwhile, you don't have anyone in Canada, right? They made an error on the facts, right? On the facts of your personal file. You could also think, here in the blog, I talk about the nationality. If you have a different nationality and they reject you, or different requirements on the facts, right? So look at the facts, look at the letter, and make sure that the facts are correct. We've also
Sorry, Cédric. This is awesome. This is awesome. Everybody has their pets, and apparently, when my daughter comes home, and I'm so sorry to cut off here, I have to speak about the dog in the room here.
Yeah, that's fine.
My dog likes to sit up here on the window, and at this particular situation, my daughter came home and he wanted no part of staying up there. So either he was going to be crawling over top of me, or I was going to break down, rudely interrupt you midstream, and help him to exit his little covey here that he hangs out in. So sorry, Cédric.
No,
back on track. This is the reality of our firm, right? Like, we have all kinds of things going on in our lives. And yes, even dogs that are a part of this whole venture. So, all right, I'll turn it back to you.
No, for sure. I mean, we're a virtual law firm, which is fantastic, to work with clients abroad, right? I mean, we are 100% set up to work with clients all around the world. In any event, talking about the factual errors.
Yes.
Talking about factual errors such as, family in Canada, but we've also had some clients where they have 10 times the amount of sufficient funds in cash in their account, and they get rejected for sufficient funds, right? So obviously there's a factual error there, and you're going to want to make that very clear. In my application, I provide a bank statement. I have X amount of funds. I've had this for many years. I meet the sufficient funds. Please help me get that. So this is the factual errors. Going on to the legal errors. Legal errors might be a little bit harder to spot in the actual rejection letter. You can think, for example, we have a few examples here inside the blog, but you can think, for example, you don't meet a legal requirement, although you met it. So, for example, you think of, they ask you to get a police certificate. However, you don't actually need a police certificate, right? So you never provided one, and they reject your application. So that would be a legal error. They made a mistake on how they applied the law. Again, a little bit harder to spot. We would work with you to try to identify any legal errors to make sure that everything was done properly. You can provide additional information in your request, additional evidence. However, you should also consider whether or not it's better to just make a new application. As we've talked about, the web forms, the reconsideration request, sometimes this is better placed in a new application. Lastly, and this is arguing completely, if the decision is right in facts and the decision is right in law, there's very little legal merit to your applications, right? If they correctly submit your application. However, you may want to consider any compelling reasons outside of your control. So with COVID, with family members being sick, with very different situations, in some cases, you're not able to meet requirements of the IRPA. You're not able to submit documents. You're not able to do certain things in the 30-day period. So if you have any compelling reasons, definitely add it. I would focus on ones that are outside of your control, but this is highly discretionary. There's no legal basis for them to say yes or no based on the hardship you experienced. And lastly, it goes without saying, be curious. I mean, obviously you want this to be approved. Obviously, you want to come to Canada, but you know, you don't be mean in your reconsideration request. We've mentioned they have a high level of discretion. You know, if you're rude in your reconsideration request, it definitely does not help you.
Yeah, it does not. Be
It does
kind.
not.
Yeah.
Be kind. The very last step is obviously submitting it. You're going to submit it by web form. You know, we suggest to submit one reconsideration request. If there's new evidence, you know, after the ATIP and whatnot, you can submit a second one. But it's generally not a good approach to submit, you know, 10 reconsideration requests. It's just going to commit backlogs. There's no fees for the reconsideration. Sorry, there's no fees for the reconsideration request. There we go.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Like in our current world right now, individuals get very frustrated because it can take up to a month for them to add anything to a file. And when it comes to reconsideration, even in the context of a positive situation, it can take up to a month before you even get an acknowledgement. And it's, you know, over the next few months, and we're recording this in 2022 in June. You know, everything is a mess within the immigration processing, and their backlogs of requests, just with people who have applications that are stalled out. So trust me, reconsideration request ranks pretty low on their priority scale. So you need to be patient. And like Cédric said, making the same request 5 times in some instances, and often it's not going to get a faster result just because of the multiple requests. So yes.
Yeah, so I mean, the next thing to discuss is you know, the successful examples or consideration requests. So we have 2 examples here on the blog. I've spoken about some, but you know, lack of funds. You've well, there we go. We have the slide examples of successful requests. So we've already talked about a few successful examples. We have some on the blog that talk about, you know, lack of funds. You know, another one is the failing to provide additional documents as requested by SUC, but you never got the letter. They never actually sent it to you. Obviously, this assumes that you have the correct address and contact information, right? But you know, mistakes do happen, right? So this would be another example where you would make a reconsideration request. Another example, we could talk about unsuccessful reconsideration requests.
I think that would be very, very useful. Sometimes you learn as much from the failed attempts as you do the successful ones.
Yeah, and you know, we've seen some cases where you're missing your language test by 5 points. Right? Language test, you have to meet a certain level, a certain points, and you've missed it by 5 points. Well, you've missed it. You know, it's harsh, but you know, where do they draw the line, right? When does it become 5 points, 10 points? So IRCC tend to be very like they have requirements for a reason, and they want you to meet these requirements for certain programs. So, you know, if you're missing by 5 points and, you know, you get your rejection letter and you redo your test and you resubmit it, it's not going to work, right? You need to be eligible before you apply, at the time that you apply. So that would be an example of an unsuccessful reconsideration request.
And I can give a hypothetical too, Cédric. If I carry forward that example of the client who really would have been entitled to a reconsideration on procedural fairness grounds, but ultimately, in the context of their express entry, they were sitting at, you know, about 490 CRS points when they were drawn. The pass mark was 478. And so, okay, well, the problem was because the sibling may not have been in Canada, there would have been a loss of 15 points. And so if the IRCC, you know, reviewed things correctly and the person no longer got the points for the sibling, that 15 points would have dropped him below the pass mark at the time in which he received the ITA, which was 478. It would have dropped him down to 475. And so everything very quickly unraveled. So yeah, you have to really, really dig deep. And that's, you know, for all intents and purposes, that's what we do as lawyers. And they weren't volunteering anything in my discussion. I put on my old officer hat and started digging and realized, okay, this is what's really happening in the background. I think they just didn't want to go through the hassle of disproving your sibling points, and it was easier just to say you didn't respond than it was to challenge you, because passport, travel, you know, records, Canada-US border, everything is visible and they could easily see. So, all right, last one right here. So Cédric, how can we actually help people if we haven't already done that now for free? But how do we help people? What's the process for us?
Yeah, so you know, it all starts with consultation. And during the consultation, we're going to talk about your rejection letter. We're going to talk about the documents you provided. And we're essentially going to look at to see whether or not there's any basis to make the reconsideration request. And we're also going to evaluate whether or not there's other recourses, right? Should we go with the appeal? Should we have the judicial review? Should we reapply? And if we go with the reconsideration route, we're actually going to help you prepare your reconsideration request. We're going to argue it on your behalf. We're going to help you submit it to IRCC to have the most, the best likelihood of succeeding. This being said, you can also do the reconsideration request at the same time that you submit a new application. So when we work with clients who've already been rejected, we're really going to work hard to overcome the reason for the rejection. We're going to reach out for more letters of support. We're going to provide more documents. We're going to provide more arguments as to how we meet this requirement to get your visa, your application, and whatnot. So it's so for example, take the work permit as an example. We have to prepare the whole application for the work permit, and then we're going to go above and beyond to work with you to understand your situation, and whether it's drafting a letter of explanation, whether it's getting more documents from the employer, to really overcome what the problem is with your first application. And in some cases we can be successful and it can be granted on the second. On some cases, no, it might still get rejected. But we're gonna have a really good file if you want to go to judicial review, if you want to go to court to argue that you meet the requirements. So these are the services we offer. We offer essentially full reviews, Mark.
Perfect. Well, I guess the one last piece of advice I would give people is please, please, please don't wait until reconsideration to reach out to us for assistance. And, but if that's the case, just like always, we're here to help. Thanks a lot, Cédric.
That was a pleasure, Mark.
Take care, everyone.